Hello, I am Umbrenero and welcome back to Umbrenero's Life. Today's video is making an apple pie. So, one of the things we like to have for a dessert is homemade apple pie. And that is what we are making in this video. So, as you can see, my husband started off by peeling, cutting up, and slicing some of the apples from one of our local apple orchards. So this is the part of making the apple pie that does take the longest, is getting them all cut, peeled, sliced, all of that. And if you have someone that is willing to help you out, go for it. So for me personally, I like making my filling from scratch because there's just something about the canned ones that don't taste right. And like I have said before in some of our other food-related videos, we do have to pay attention to food allergies. And that's where doing it this way, we know what we're using for our ingredients. So this recipe that I use, I have almost memorized because of how often I have made apple pies over the last few years, and they usually turn out pretty good. But my husband went into our dining room to keep cutting apples so that way I could start on the crust. So I added flour, salt, sugar, cinnamon, brown sugar to a bowl, mixed it up quickly, just until everything was combined and it looked okay. And then I added the butter. And this is one of the funnest parts, I would say, of making my pies that I do, is I don't put a top crust on. I put a crumble crust. So I start with that first, so that way it can set up in the fridge while I am working on the filling. So I added the butter to the bowl and started mixing it. And you're going to want to make sure your hands are clean for making this recipe, because you're going to need to get your hands into it because the butter does like sticking to the fork. And you just need to combine all of these ingredients until it resembles wet sand. And when I say wet sand, I mean all of it. So even the very floury bits that don't quite incorporate right away, you have to work them until they are incorporated. Because your body heat from your hands working with the butter will start melting it a little bit, making it easier to get it blended in with the flour and sugars. So as you can see, it's starting to clump up here. It's starting to act like wet sand. And once it gets that right consistency where it's not powdery anymore and it does stick to itself but crumbles easily, you know your topping is ready to go. But after that was done, it was time to start on the filling. And this was just some of the apples that my husband had done at this time. And I usually use around 6 to 8 cups of apples, like sliced, just to have enough, because I like the pie to have extra filling and not be too light. So I had to add the ingredients to make the filling a filling. Started with some sugar, added some flour to help bind it together, and then I needed to add the cinnamon and nutmeg. So just the couple ingredients is all that you need for, in reality, 2 pies to be made. And this isn't all of the apples that end up in the pie, because my husband was still cutting and peeling them while I was doing this. But one of the things that I will do, if it's taking a bit to get them all cut up and everything, is I will put the first part of the apples in, add the sugar, flour, and the spices, and I will let it sit. So that way the liquid starts pulling out and everything. So at this point, I had to take out my pie crusts. I have tried to make pie crust before. I failed miserably. I think I've figured out since then what I did wrong. But in the meantime, I used some store-bought gluten-free gluten-free pie crusts that can be filled with your ingredients. So here I started putting in the fillings for both of the pies, and it's hard to do this with a spoon sometimes because you're not sure if you're putting the same amount in each pie. So you have to go in and actually see where you're at physically. But this was also after all the apples I needed were cut, and you can see how they're shiny. It means they all got to marinate with the seasoning, sugar, flour. So it worked out quite well. Had to put the last couple apples on the pies so that way they didn't go to waste. And then it was time for putting on the crust. Well, not the crust, the crumble on top. So the crumble was sitting in the fridge for probably an hour. Well, not even an hour, half an hour. And it was still like wet sand, but it just had that right feeling to that it was ready to be crumbled onto the pies. And I usually like doing this by hand because then I can see how big the crumbles are and split it evenly between the 2 pies. because there have been times in the past where one pie would get more topping than the other, and it just didn't feel fair. But like on that pie that I'm crumbling here, I had a big chunk that I had to break up and sprinkle on to make it relatively equal in the amount of crumble. But after doing this so many times, you kind of learn, okay, this is all I need to do this, and to make it kind of even. Then it was just throwing these 2 pies into the oven for, I think it's like 35 minutes. So after the timer has gone off, it's time to take them out. And this is usually where I get a little bit of help so I don't accidentally burn myself like I have done multiple times with taking pies out of the oven. And they don't look so bad. And all they are very good, and it's an easy dessert to make. So, thank you for watching, and until next time, I am Umbrenero. Bye!